All right, let's talk about the most effective spin doctor in the world. One that works for you 24/7, inside your own head. We're talking about your ego's internal PR firm. We're talking about cognitive dissonance, and we're about to explore why your brain will go to some pretty extraordinary lengths to make you feel like you're right, even when a part of you knows you were wrong. Okay, let's get into it.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. This is the core paradox we are tackling today. This one sentence captures this really profound and, often uncomfortable truth about how our minds work. It's a biological drive that values feeling consistent way more than it values being correct. And understanding that is the very first step toward real self-awareness. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with this happy liar paradox. Then we'll dive into the internal battle it kicks off. After that, we'll actually map out the brain's 5-step process for shutting down this conflict. Then we'll get into the why, the deep psychological reason it all happens. And finally, I'll give you some tools to break the cycle and choose truth over comfort. Okay, so let's start with this fundamental mystery. We all like to think of ourselves as pretty rational, principled people, right? And yet, we have this incredible, almost magical capacity for self-deception, for rewriting our own history in real time, just to protect our self-image. So why? Why do we do that? Seriously, think about it for a second. Maybe you snapped at a friend and you immediately felt that little pang of guilt. But then, within minutes, you had this whole mental list of all the ways they kinda had it coming. Or maybe you bought that expensive gadget you knew you couldn't really afford, and then you spent the rest of the day looking for reviews that told you what a genius purchase it was. Look, this isn't some character flaw. It's a feature of your brain's operating system. And that whole experience of justifying ourselves, well, that's just the symptom of a much, much deeper conflict going on inside. It's what some psychologists call the battle for the self, a constant clash between who we believe we are and what we actually do. And this is where the real drama is. At its absolute core, cognitive dissonance is triggered by a mismatch. It's pretty simple. On one side, you've got your identity, right? Your self-concept. You see yourself as honest, kind, smart, responsible. But on the other side, you've got your reality, your actual behavior, which, let's be honest, is sometimes not so honest, or kind, or responsible. And when those two things clash, your brain sounds an alarm. Now, this isn't just some vague feeling of guilt. No, this is a measurable neurological event. It's called dissonance arousal. It's that knot in your stomach, that pressure in your chest. It's a feeling of psychological heat. It's a very specific part of your brain called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, or DAC for short, and it's firing off a distress signal. And here is what is so fascinating about this. Your brain takes this alarm very seriously. It doesn't file away, "I'm being a hypocrite," as some interesting philosophical problem. No, it categorizes it as a threat, basically on the same level as a physical danger. This feeling of being internally inconsistent is so uncomfortable that your brain's #1 job becomes shutting it down, and fast. So there are 2 ways to turn off that alarm. The hard way is to actually change your behavior, admit you were wrong. But that's, well, it's metabolically expensive. It takes humility, it takes effort. So the brain almost always takes the easy way out. It dives headfirst into self-justification, kicking into what you could call rationalization overdrive. It starts spinning a new story. It looks for any info that confirms the new story. That's confirmation bias. And ultimately, it sacrifices objective truth for that sweet, sweet feeling of internal peace. Now, this whole process isn't chaotic. In fact, it's a predictable, repeatable, and totally automated neurological sequence. So let's break down the exact 5-step loop your brain runs every single time it needs to solve this internal conflict. As you can see, it's a 5-stage process. It all starts with a mismatch, which triggers an alarm. Then the brain makes this critical pivot, which leads to a new realignment, and finally, a reinforcement of that new story. And here's the thing. Once you learn to see this pattern in real time, you actually gain the power to interrupt. So step 1, it all starts right here, with the mismatch. You believe you're a patient person, but you just yelled at the barista. You believe you're disciplined, but you skipped the gym for the 3rd day in a row. An action has happened that directly contradicts a core value you hold about yourself. The conflict has officially been created. And immediately, bam. Your brain's conflict monitor, that DAC we talked about, it detects the clash, it fires off that biological alarm. This is the exact moment you feel that jolt of discomfort, that psychological heat. It's your brain basically screaming, "Error!
Error, inconsistency detected, threat to self-concept imminent. Now this is the most important moment in the whole loop, the pivot. The discomfort is just too high, so your brain scrambles for a story, any story, that can explain away the mismatch. It's not, I lost my patience, it's, well, that barista was totally incompetent, I had no choice. It's not, I lack discipline, it's, you know what, I needed a rest day, it was the smart thing to do. Your brain finds an external reason to relieve the internal pressure.
Okay, so once your brain finds a plausible excuse, it moves to step 4, internal realignment. The second you accept that new story, the barista deserved it, the psychological heat just vanishes. The DACC alarm goes quiet. You feel this wave of relief. And that brings us to the final and most crucial step, reinforcement. Your brain logs that excuse as a successful strategy, which makes it a pre-approved alibi that's even faster and easier to use the next time you're in the same situation. The loop literally gets stronger. So you have to be asking, why? I mean, why are we hardwired with this elaborate self-deception machine? The answer lies in a really fundamental principle of survival: the brain's desperate, deep-seated need to protect the ego. It's all about something called ego homeostasis. Okay, so homeostasis is just any process where a biological system tries to maintain stability. And your brain sees a stable, consistent identity as absolutely essential for navigating the world. If you were constantly questioning who you are, it would lead to what's called an identity collapse, a state of such high confusion and chaos that it would just be metabolically devastating. Your brain just can't afford that kind of energy drain.
So the brain makes a pragmatic choice. It sees two options on the table: be wrong and calm, or be right and conflicted. See, the conflict of admitting you made a mistake generates all that psychological heat, which burns a massive amount of metabolic energy. So from a purely biological standpoint, a comforting lie is just way more efficient than a disruptive truth. Your brain will choose the path of least resistance every single time.
I love this analogy because it really illustrates the internal drama. You can think of your DACC as this frantic alarm system down in the basement screaming that there was a fire. But your prefrontal cortex, the brain's calm, cool, collected CEO upstairs, hears the alarm and just gets on the intercom and says, "Everyone stay calm. It was a false alarm. It was just a drill." The CEO's job is to restore order, and it does that by muffling the signal from below, prioritizing stability over, actually addressing the fire.
All right. Now for the most important part. We've diagnosed the problem, we've mapped the system, we get the motive. So, how do we intervene? How do we override this powerful biological default? The answer is to start practicing a skill called radical intellectual honesty. Here is your toolkit. These are 4 practical techniques to help you short-circuit that resolution loop. First, label the tension. When you feel that heat, just say to yourself, okay, I'm feeling cognitive dissonance right now. Just naming it creates a little space between the feeling and your reaction. Second is the mistakes were made drill, which we're going to dig into in just a second. Third, build self-complexity. This means seeing yourself not as just one single good person, but as a complex human who's capable of both good and bad actions. This makes any one mistake feel like less of a threat to your entire identity. And fourth is somatic awareness. Just pay attention to the physical feeling of dissonance, that knot in your stomach. By just observing it, you can learn to tolerate it without needing to immediately rationalize it away. Now let's look at what might be the most powerful tool here, the mistakes were made drill. This is the drill. It sounds so simple, but it is incredibly difficult to do. The next time you do something that triggers that dissonance alarm, you state the fact of your action and you connect it to your values. You admit the mismatch out loud. I was rude, and that doesn't align with my values. I was lazy, and that goes against my goal of being disciplined. But the real power of this is in what comes next, or more accurately, what doesn't come next. And that's it. Period. Full stop. No but. No justification, no excuse. Because the moment you say but, I was rude, but he was being annoying, you have just activated the rationalization pivot. The drill is about just sitting in the discomfort of the truth, even for just a moment. And by doing that, you're telling your brain, hey, I can handle this feeling. This conflict is not a survival threat. You are literally retraining your neurological response. And this brings us to the final and honestly the most profound choice that all this knowledge presents us with. It's a choice between the automatic, comforting stories spun by our ego and the often difficult but ultimately liberating truth. Just let this one sink in too. A fact is a fact, an action is an action. The truth just stands on its own. That whole complex, energy-draining process of rationalization and justification and confirmation bias,
It exists for one reason and one reason only: to protect the fragile ego from the reality of its own imperfection. So here's the bottom line. That feeling of dissonance, that psychological heat, it's not a signal that you're a bad person. It's a signal that you have an opportunity to grow. It is a compass pointing directly toward a gap between your values and your actions. So the next time you feel it, what are you going to do? Are you going to let the PR firm take over and spin another comforting story? Or will you have the courage to listen to the signal, sit with the truth, and take one step closer to the person you truly want to be? The choice is always yours.